Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hardware News Recap of the Week. This one is packed. So AMD is clarifying some additional details on its Ryzen 7000 series CPUs following last week's in-person announcements that we covered separately on the channel. One of the topics for this week is the DDR5 frequency, as AMD calls it, sweet spot to achieve the best results for the price on AMD Ryzen 7000 CPUs. So that's going to be something you'll want to pay attention to as this stuff launches, because DDR5 is still very easy to overspend on right now. Additionally, ASRock is warning of long boot times on X670E, at least for some of its motherboards, and we'll see if that extends to the rest of them. And in some other news, NVIDIA has been told by the US government that it has to stop selling some of its GPUs for AI use in China. So we'll be covering all of that and more, like USB4 version 2.0. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly. Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut and Cryonaut thermal pastes are high-performing thermal interfaces for use on CPUs and GPUs. You can bring an old card back to peak performance by repasting it and doing preventative maintenance, and Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut is ideal for water cooling and air cooling for new and old cards alike. Cryonaut paste is one of the top-performing pastes for extreme overclocking with CPUs and GPUs, and has been used in several world record-scoring machines. Learn more at the link in the description below. So kicking off the week, Ryzen 7000 still in the news. If you missed it, we have two separate videos. One is a delidded Ryzen 7950X CPU. It's a 16-core part. And the other one is just more in-depth coverage of the announcements that unfolded in Austin last week. And this is on the table because we're getting ready for some liquid nitrogen overclocking, which I'm personally really excited about because it's been a few years since we've done it seriously. And Ryzen 7000, we got to talk about it a little bit with some people at the event, but can't share anything yet. And the most I can say right now is it looks like it's going to be really fun to do overclocking on. And I think it's safe to say at this point that the rumor previously about not being able to control voltages, as we speculated at the time, was incorrect. But we can't really talk more about that right now. So if you missed it, the quickest possible recap is there's 4 CPUs that were announced. There's a 7950X that is 16 cores. That's $700. There's the 7600X at the low end. That one is $300. It's the cheapest part. Then in the middle, there's a 7700X and there's a 7900X, and respectively, those are $400 and $550. That gets you up on the basics. Check out the other video for more details on it. As for launch date, these will come out near the end of September. And additionally, for the news this week, AMD's Robert Halleck gave the community a few details regarding Zen 4's behavior in memory and F-clock, or the Infinity Fabric clock. Specifically, Halleck was talking about the frequencies on AMD's Discord, as reported on and captured by WCCF Tech. AMD shared that the Ryzen 7000 default F-clock will be 1733 megahertz, and it noted that aligning clocks across the CPU in a 1-to-1-to-1 or F-clock to U-clock to M-clock manner is not important with this generation. Now, weirdly, we were also given this information at the event last week, along with a lot of other stuff, but it was all embargoed until September sometime in the future. So, we're not really sure what AMD wants embargoed at this point, but it seems to be leaking its own information. So great. Anyway, yes, auto to 1-to-1 will work well this time. We might as well just go ahead and say it since AMD's putting it out there. And if you weren't familiar with overclocking in previous Ryzen generation CPUs, what mattered most was actually not necessarily the frequency of any one given part. So Infinity Fabric clock, the CPU, the memory, M-clock, F-clock, and U-clock, it mattered more to have them all in 1-to-1 step with each other, so that you didn't have stuff that was sort of out of step and potentially hurting the performance more than it was helping it, even though, say, F-clock might be higher than otherwise if you drop down to 1-to-1. And we talked about all this over the past several years now in many videos. So this time moving to auto for F-clock and then 1-to-1 for U-clock and M-clock, that's actually pretty big. That'll have a big impact on overclocking. It means you could potentially drive F-clock higher than you would otherwise and potentially get a benefit from it that previously you'd be in that diminishing returns area where actually it might be worse than if you had just left it alone. So that's pretty cool, and we'll be covering that once we get the CPUs into benchmark, and also why it's interesting for overclocking. So F-clock specifically will automatically adjust depending on the frequency of the DDR5 being used. AMD gave the example of F-clock adjusting to 1767 MHz for DDR5 5300 and to 2000 MHz for DDR5 6000. Additionally, AMD considers DDR5 6000 to be its so-called sweet spot when balancing cost, stability, and performance. Now, AMD also claimed that there are edge cases where some particularly well-binned CPUs with a stronger Infinity Fabric clock, high-end, could benefit from setups at 2000 MHz for F-clock, but this is apparently rare. And since AMD is breaking its own embargo and disclosing some things we thought were still embargoed, we might as well go ahead and share some additional information. So we've heard formally, this is like a thing, it's not a rumor, that the F-clock, you can start approaching 3000 MHz for extreme overclocking, and that's what we're going to be looking into later. But out of respect for the rest of AMD's embargo, we'll hold further information unless they decide to keep leaking their own stuff that we thought was going to be at the launch. Anyway, we're back to events, which means we're back to companies confusing themselves with which information is privileged until launch and which they can just post anyway. Next one, ASRock warns of long X670E boot times. So this is from Twitter leaker 9550Pro, who posted an ASRock X670E Steel Legend motherboard photo and posted it with an informational sticker that is over the DIMM slots in that photo. In addition to showing you which slots to use for ideal setup, the sticker also warns, quote, "The first boot may take some time. Please refer to the following table for booting time." It claims that upon first boot or after clearing CMOS, it could take anywhere from 100 to 400 seconds, depending on the capacity of the RAM installed. Of course, we don't know if this is going to be across all X670 motherboards, just ASRock boards, or just this specific motherboard. But the fact of the matter is, if this is widespread, it might be wise to maybe go down to one memory stick when you're flashing BIOS or just trying to get an initial boot up and running to see if everything's working, because it'll be faster to get the answer to your question, because the boot times are looking pretty long and some of these on the table. So we'll let you know in testing what the outcome is. We should have a couple boards coming in. We'll be able to test them and see, is this widespread or is it just this one ASRock board? Up next, EK has announced a new line of AM5 compatible water blocks for AMD's AM5 CPUs and Ryzen 7000 series. This is called the EK Quantum Velocity Squared DRGB-AM5. And they're going to be available on pre-order initially, obviously with a launch closer to when the CPUs are actually available. So these are mostly the same design as EK's previous AM4 blocks, but they're interesting for one reason, which is it points out that, as we talked about in the AMD announcement information video, AMD is moving sort of to that LGA 2011-2066 style socket, where, if you're not familiar with it, it's that Intel socket that's really nice to work with, actually. It's got a double clamp on it, but the part that's familiar for AM5 is that you've got basically a backplate that's already in the board, it's threaded, and all you do is screw something down into it. You don't have any pass-throughs or standoffs or anything like that beyond what's already in the board. So it's, at least with LGA 2011, 2066, it's one of the nicest possible sockets to work with for installing a cooler or a water block, and that's what AM5 will be on as well. So that's going to be a nice quality of life improvement over AM4. And EK is revising its mounting method, even though the block itself is largely the same, or at least looks it right now. Now, the good news here is that this results in a simplified one-piece block that just screws into the board. It should be simple, where you just attach your cooler to the front of the board without hassling with the back, and we'd be glad to see this trend continue. In light of this change, EK is also planning to offer mounting kits to adapt most of its existing AM4 products to AM5. EK published a list of specific compatible products in this news post. We're likely to see this as a trend from a lot of cooler manufacturers, especially for products that required their own backplate on AM4. With the new EK AM5 water blocks, those come in a variety of finishes. They range from $137 for the nickel and the plexi version to a crazy $220 for genuine gold plating. And don't worry, EK insists that the gold plating is still not a sham. It directly acknowledged our previous rant in a news video with a heart GN in its press release, so that went to everybody. You know, sometimes you have a bigger impact on the industry, and sometimes the impact is really, really small. But at least EK is marketing as self-aware. I'm assuming that's Dave, and if that's the case, hello Dave at EK, formerly AlphaCool. Thanks for the heart, GN. All right, next one. AMD to announce Ryzen 7000 series CPUs with Vcache at CES. This, to be very clear, is a rumor. So this is hot on the heels, of course, of the official announcement for the 4 CPUs. We know there will be more. We just don't know when yet. And Greymon55 on Twitter hinted at a future announcement of Vcache CPUs. So that'd be something like the 5800X3D that we have now coming out with the 7000 series. And these, to be exceptionally clear here, AMD has officially confirmed that there will be Vcache CPUs for the Ryzen 7000 series and for whatever the Zen 5 CPUs are called. So we know for at least 2 full generations they'll be available. It's just a matter of when. As for the tweet, it doesn't get any more bare bones than this. The tweet simply reads V95, V9, V8, which we take to mean 7950X3D, 7900X3D, and 7800X3D. In a reply asking if these would come out in Q1 of next year, Greymon simply replied, CES. Now, based on AMD's published roadmaps, this kind of makes sense. It's only about 4 months between the 7000 series launch and CES. CES, if you're not aware, is one of the 2 biggest electronics shows that covers computer hardware in the industry. The other one is Computex, that happens around June, late May. And for this one, the timing kind of makes sense, where it would put AMD under some pressure for a follow-up. That'd be with Vcache, since Intel is rumored to be announcing its 13th gen CPUs just after the 7000 series becomes available. So it kind of makes sense where AMD is going to want to come back and hit Intel with something pretty short after Intel launches. Up next, the best topic, USB. The USB promoter group has announced that USB4 version 2.0 is on its way. We had just gotten back on track with USB4 being a refreshingly simple name as compared to USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, but it appears, as with all things in life, we are drifting back into the darkness where we'll be enveloped by the comfort of not knowing what the hell any of the names mean. It's bad right now. Like if we could put a USB naming convention versus speeds chart on the screen, that should pretty much clarify. So this update will allow up to 80 gigabits per second transfer rate over USB Type-C, which is actually insane. That's pretty cool. But it requires use of new active cables to reach peak bandwidth. The group will also update Type-C and USB power delivery specs to reflect the new capabilities. The exact details on the spec will be published during this year's USB Dev Days event in November. So the part you need to know, the actually actionable information where if you, like many of us on our team, serve as sort of a point of contact for all your family or friends about how does technology do stuff, the thing you need to know is that a USB Type-C cable is not a USB Type-C cable. There are different specs of them, and especially moving forward, it's very important that you buy the right one if you want the maximum speeds, and obviously it doesn't matter so much if you're just looking for a charging cable or something like that. So the new level of bandwidth will allow even the highest current DisplayPort transmission modes to operate via USB. That's the cool part. Theoretically, this enables 240 hertz operation at 4K native resolution. And typical of new standards being announced like this, you shouldn't expect USB 4 version 2.0, we should just call it USB 420 or something, in products anytime soon. And it's always announced and ratified before they actually come out in products, but that's normal. Up next, a leak. So this one is from leaker Kitty Yuko on Twitter, who shared an image of an NVIDIA RTX 40 series card, this one specifically a 4080, fully assembled and in its Faraday cage, or its ESD safe bag. The card's design strongly resembles the 3090 or the 3090 Ti models, at least in the shroud. It's got the flow-through design where it has one fan that pushes through and the other one that just pushes into the GPU area of the board and sort of distributes between the fins. And the slight differences are with a larger fan, it looks like, where it bevels out over the edge of the cooler just for space conservation. And other than this, the fan blades are different, but it looks pretty similar. Now, even though the cooler seems to be just as long and tall as a 3090 or Ti FE design, the big question is how many slots it'll be, and we can't really tell from this perspective. One minor detail is the font used for the RTX 4080 lettering. It's definitely different from the previous generation, but as pointed out by Tear257 on Twitter, it seems to be a new one in use by NVIDIA, so it doesn't necessarily invalidate the leak. And we don't know exactly the accuracy of the leak at this point, but we're so close to a launch now, the likelihood of these being accurate is increasing, as launch approaches. Next one, ASUS TUF GT502 case. This is not a rumor, this one is news. ASUS is launching a new case, best described as perhaps legally distinct from the Lianli 011 Dynamic, and it's called the TUF Gaming GT502. So just like the Metallic Gear line, which is owned by Fantex but rebranded, ASUS is getting in on copycat cases, following up on Lianli's work with the 011 series. Copycat cases are okay as long as they innovate meaningfully, and ASUS has done so by adding a strap to the top of the case. The GT502 otherwise is divided into two main compartments, pretty much as you would expect. The main system goes in the left-hand compartment when looking at it front on, and the glass panels are on the front and the side. The right-hand compartment holds the power supply, it hides cables, and it offers a few drive mounts. On top of the case, ASUS's attached straps are apparently able to handle up to 30 kilograms, similar to what it did on the Helios before this. One differentiating feature of the GT502 versus cases like the 011 Dynamic is the ability to mount up to a 360mm radiator in the top half of the right-hand side panel, which is in addition to 360mm mounting locations on the top of the case and the dividing wall between the chambers. So this is what they're doing different than the others in the 011 type case family. This, however, it could lead to some really wild configurations for water cooling where you might end up with potentially good or exceptionally very bad thermals depending on how you configure it. So if you're planning to use that mounting location, be very careful about your clearances, about cable clutter, and where you're pointing the fans. This is one of those cases where they are giving you enough tools to build it very poorly. That's not a bad thing. It means that you as a user have more power to do what you want with it. But it does mean that it takes some planning because you can execute it very poorly if you don't plan. The GT502 will be available as a standard edition, which we believe comes with no fans, from what we can tell right now, and a plus edition, which comes with 4 ARGB fans and an ARGB hub. ASUS quickly and awkwardly points out that the hub is, quote, protected from accidental short circuits with its plastic housing. We're back to the marketing the negative conversation about EK a couple weeks ago, where it's like, you know, if you're going to point that out, you might as well also point out that the case is not made of asbestos. And the radiator mounts aren't painted with radioactive waste. There's a long list of negatives we could market, and that's one of the weirder ones. But it's also especially weird because, like, it's kind of like marketing that a product isn't going to burn your house down. You know, that's kind of hopefully a given. You shouldn't have to say, buy our toaster, it won't burn down your house. But that's where we are because we've had a couple of those types of fire hazards in cases over the last couple of years.
Should I do it more? Or I don't think Steve would be happy if I did it more necessarily.
So the GT502 is coming out sometime soon. Not sure that we'll review it. If cases are like too similar and not sufficiently distinct from other cases on the market, we're so backed up on case reviews that we do have to pick very carefully which ones we review because we simply can't do all of them. And frankly, not all of them deserve it either. Next one, Intel Raptor Lake launch. This one, a leak. So this rounds out the leaks for the week with WXNod on Twitter sharing a photo of Intel's alleged launch schedule for its 13th generation Raptor Lake CPUs. If you see the name Raptor Lake, that means 13,000 series. The leak alleges that the 13th gen will be announced on September 27th and that the 13900K pre-orders will be available the same day. Following that, October 13th will open pre-orders for the 13700K and 13600K, and then finally on October 20th, initial CPUs will be available. If this is true, it'll mean that Intel's 13th gen will be out less than a month after AMD's Ryzen 7000. And regardless of the validity of this particular leak, this fall is going to be awesome for computer hardware. It's kind of like the 2020 October window where it was just packed with Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, and we're doing it again. It's honestly, this is my favorite type of work to do when it's just back-to-back high-end new generation hardware releases that we can burn through them all, start getting into the lower-end stuff as well, do value judgments. There's a lot to test with this stuff, and it's a really exciting time. So we're looking forward to it greatly, and I know the team's really really antsy to get up and running on testing all the new stuff. So anyway, it'll be fun. But next one, US government restricting NVIDIA on exports to China and to Russia. The Securities and Exchange Commission has released a statement regarding a new export restriction by the United States government on NVIDIA. The company is now required to obtain a license in order to sell its high-end computer accelerator cards to customers in China and in Russia, which applies to the existing Ampere A100 and upcoming Hopper H100 cards, and any products containing them, such as DGX solutions. Now, because technology is a moving target, the US government has sort of set the sights on the A100, where it says that any future designs that meet or exceed the performance of the A100, so basically everything following, will also need to seek this license from the US government to be sold to parties in either of those two countries. And it's given no assurance that it will be granted in any particular amount of time either. So the government at this point claims that the requirement will address a risk that the chips will be used by the militaries of these two countries, and NVIDIA doesn't currently sell to customers in Russia, so there's no change there. However, the SEC does note that the restrictions may require NVIDIA to move some operations out of China. NVIDIA is currently seeking exemptions for internal development and for support activities. The SEC went on to point out that NVIDIA's outlook for its third fiscal quarter included about $400 million in potential sales to China. NVIDIA will have to fill those expected sales with other products that don't fall under the license requirements if they are unable to obtain the licenses. Up next, some more physical hardware analysis. So Logitech has a new G502 mouse, wildly popular mouse, been around for a long time now. Back when we actually used to review mice is when the G502 Proteus Core came out, and that was the first one of this series. So now it has an update. It has the G502X. They've dropped apparently name. It's like Orion Spark or whatever it was called, and Proteus Core. They've gone to just X instead. So there's a G502X, there's a G502X Lightspeed, and there's a G502X Plus. And the G502 is wired, the others are wireless or can be plugged in. And all of them have been updated with Logitech's new Hero 25K sensor, which the company claims will track down to the sub-micron level. All three of the new models use optical mechanical hybrid switches, which trigger optically, but still have a tactile click. The body of the mouse has been redesigned to be lighter weight, coming in at 89 grams up to 106 grams, depending on the model. And for reference, the original G502 weighed 121 grams. The wireless Lightspeed and the Plus models are capable of wireless charging via Logitech's PowerPlay mats. Those are the ones with the Qi chargers. And all of the new mice are available in white or black colorways. And the Plus model has some RGB LEDs to light up the palm of your hand, which you won't be able to see while you're playing games. These new models are priced at $80 for the 502X, $140 for the Lightspeed, and $160 for the Plus. And we don't review mice at this point, so we're not able to help you with that one, but we do like to cover announcements of actual hardware when they exist. Next one, small form factor getting a boom here with new cases coming out, and one of them is from SSUPD. This is hot on the heels of our video with Gordon Ma-Un on PC World's channel, where I talked with Gordon about whether or not, in his words, small form factor sucks. And you should check that video out if you haven't seen it. It's a lot of fun. It's basically just Gordon and I antagonizing each other over what the internet thinks about small form factor PCs. All right, so this one, the small form factor crowd has been blessed, apparently, by the SSUPD Meshroom S case. They previously launched the Meshlicious, God, I hate that name. All right. They previously announced the Meshlicious, which is a disgusting and difficult to say name, and now they're announcing the Meshroom. These are very unmarketable. So this is a successor to the Meshlicious case, and it has panels, exterior steel panels that are entirely ventilated or fully ventilated for the most part, making it pretty close to open air. And the Meshroom S offers an insane level of hardware support for its size. It's just under 15 liters. Obviously, look up independent reviews if you want to actually buy it, but on paper it looks interesting at least. It can fit up to ATX size motherboards, it can fit 4-slot graphics cards, ATX power supplies, dual 3.5-inch hard drives, and dual radiators. However, it cannot fit all of these things simultaneously. So because of the flexibility, you are able to min-max for your specific hardware choices, just you'll have to plan. There'll be an additional kit as well with longer legs that allow for 360mm radiators in the front if that interests you. The Meshroom S is a sandwich layout. The installation of a graphics card does require use of a PCIe Gen 4 riser, which is available in various lengths depending on the layout you're planning. And you can pick one of 3 locations for the card in the case. Some of them will be worse than others for airflow though. We don't typically cover small form factor cases, but this one actually does look really interesting. If we were gonna maybe do a one-off build, we might work with this in a stream just to see if it executes the way it looks like it would on paper. For pricing though, it is a bit steep. It's $170 with a PCIe riser. If you already have one, it's $120 without it. 2 more quick stories. AeroCool has been around for decades at this point, but they've more or less faded from relevance in recent years, sad to say. The company has launched a new Skribble case, spelled with a K, and this is a mid-tower PC case that users are encouraged to draw on. They ship a liquid chalk marker with it, and as for why it's different on these glass panels versus any others, it's because they are edge-lit with LEDs to illuminate the drawing. It's a cool gimmick. It's very unique and different. It's kind of like the in-win Lego case where it's just a different thing, and for that reason alone, it's interesting. But it does look like it requires a little bit of artistic ability if you want to actually make use of it, obviously. AeroCool attempts to live up to its name by providing a ventilated front panel, but immediately fails by slapping tempered glass right up against the vent holes. So, not great. It'll starve the front fans. It's contradictory to this ridiculous animation on the product page. That will not work that way. And case manufacturers, please stop. Please stop with the animations like that. It's got like maybe 1 millimeter of space. It's not gonna work that well. As a case though, the gimmick's interesting. If you're really good with art and hand drawing stuff, it might be fun for you. Just be aware that cooling is going to be a challenge. You might wanna go with liquid for this one just to brute force past the problem. Up next, what we've all been asking for, Spider-Man themed hard drives. That's right, Seagate's press release starts off by saying this, quote, "With great power of the hard drive comes a great responsibility of securely storing and quickly accessing the data." That's not forced at all and definitely rolls off the tongue and is very memorable. Thank you, Seagate. The external drives are available in 3 designs. They feature different characters and all have RGB lighting because that's necessary, and they're all Spider-Man themed. These are 2 terabytes, they run on USB power, and they're compatible with PC, Mac, Xbox, PlayStation, as you would expect. And the so-called special edition collectible drives are $110. Not the best cost per gigabyte on that one, but that's not what you're paying for. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersaccess.net to support us directly, and go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help fund our testing and our independent reviews. And thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.